Please welcome to the stage Major General Michael Lehnert.
Good morning. I'm going to be using notes because until yesterday morning, this talk did not exist. When Senator Regal contacted me on Sunday morning and asked that I speak here in his place, it was because of a conversation we'd had nearly 2 years earlier. It was the only time we'd ever met. But we both shared a belief in the future and confidence that the leaders we need to meet America's challenges are all about us. For those of you who are dissatisfied with dysfunction in Washington, a polarized political process, little real progress, and increasing rancor among those vying for political power, our optimism may seem misguided. However, I'm going to ask you to look beyond the next 4 years. Instead, consider the next 40 and ask ourselves where we will find the leaders for the long term. One answer is the veterans of the post-9/11 conflicts. Since my retirement from the Marine Corps, I've held the position of National Vice Chairman for Student Veterans of America. It's a volunteer position. I stepped down last month to serve as a regular board member. SVA is a student veteran-founded nonprofit designed to ensure that the current 450,000 veterans in colleges and universities across America graduate and go on to serve our country in other ways. The SVA motto is yesterday's warriors, today's scholars, tomorrow's leaders. Originally formed with only 20 campus chapters by a group of young student veterans in their 20s, in 7 years it has grown to 1,368 chapters across the country. There is an active chapter right here on this campus. I'm going to tell you about some of the young men and women who have served their country so well, what they're doing now, and why I'm so confident that our future is bright. This is a story about those who volunteered when our nation was in distress. During the initial invasion of Iraq in 2003, you might recall a very iconic Associated Press photo of the young Marine in a tank. He's smoking a cigar. There's a statue of Saddam Hussein falling in the background. The Marine is smiling. He's just fought his way 600 miles in 17 days, and his confidence is palpable. His name is Nick Popovich. Now, there are no such things as good wars, but there are good experiences in wars, and Nick is having a good one. His next tour doesn't go so well. Nick is hit by an RPG during the battle for Fallujah. He was medevaced back to the States, and the doctors at the Balboa Naval Hospital in California tell him he will never see again. Though on active duty, I was already involved in veterans education. I had a lot of support from the Chancellor of the California State University systems, and we were working to get more veterans into their schools. The logic was that the qualities that made good soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines would translate into a valuable workforce for the state of California when they completed their tours of duty. I first met Nick at a gathering in my home. The guests included a group of wounded Marines and sailors, as well as the presidents of all the 23 state universities. Nick wasn't doing well. Though blind, he told me that he needed a mission and a challenge, and he was frustrated by not being allowed to do more. He didn't want to be an invalid. He hated the term disabled. The president of San Diego State University, Steve Weber, overheard us talking and handed him his business card. As of now, he said, "You are enrolled in SDSU. Visit my office Monday morning." 4 years later, Nick graduated with honors with a degree in mathematics. He'd written a best-selling book about his recovery, not about the war he'd fought in. He'd ran for Congress, almost defeating a popular incumbent, all while attending school as a full-time student. He volunteered and went for a couple of years to work in the Mississippi Bayou country with Teach for America. Nick returned to California, where he was hired by Tesla to train their employees. Why would Tesla hire a blind Marine? The answer is simple: to inspire their employees that adversity and disability is no bar to success. Our current chairman of Student Veterans of America is a young man named Rodrigo Garcia. Rodrigo grew up poor on the tough south side of Chicago. His parents are first-generation immigrants from Mexico. As a boy, Rodrigo went with his dad around the neighborhoods, collecting and selling scrap metal. He enlisted in the Marine Corps, served 3 combat tours while simultaneously attending college, receiving his MBA at 28 and a second postdoctorate degree. Appointed as the Secretary of Illinois Veterans Affairs, he was recently made the Chief Investment Officer and Chief Financial Officer for the Illinois State Treasury to help address their financial woes. He's got a big job ahead of him. He's been named among the top 100 under 50 executive leaders in America. Most of you have shopped at Meijer. One of the founding members of SVA and our next chairman is Peter Meijer. He's the only son of the current CEO. Rather than follow his father into the family business and have a comfortable life, Peter enlisted after 9/11 in the United States Army. After several combat tours in Afghanistan, he returned to school, graduated from Columbia University, and is now getting his MBA. He also took a gap year to work in Afghanistan for a humanitarian aid organization. Though under 30, he serves as an advisor to the Kettering Foundation and the Gerald R. Ford Museum. You heard some previous speakers talk about the need for integrity and empathy. These veterans have learned why these qualities are absolutely paramount in our lives. Another veteran leader is Kirsten Downs. She served 3 combat tours in the Air Force and is currently a doctoral candidate at the University of South Florida. Last year, she bicycled across the country alone to increase awareness for the student veteran community. Her fields of expertise include suicide prevention, workplace integration, and trauma. Luke Stallcup left high school with a .8. Yeah, I didn't stutter. .8 grade point average. I don't even know how you do that. He joined the Army and he won 2 Bronze Stars for Valor as an explosive ordnance disposal technician. Graduating with highest honors from Columbia and Georgetown universities, he is now completing his MD from Duke and in his residency. Instead of disarming bombs, he plans to take care of sick children. Many of you experienced the storm last summer on the 2nd of August that left this county a disaster area. How many of you saw the recovery crews wearing Team Rubicon shirts or thought about where they came from? They were clearing trees from the homes of residents across the area of devastation to put our communities back together. All were military veterans. Team Rubicon was the inspiration of a young Marine named Jake Woods. The concept began when the earthquake in Haiti destroyed the fragile infrastructure in the poorest nation in the hemisphere. Remember that earlier talk about empathy? Jake put together a team of 8 veterans with specialized talents. They flew to Haiti and used the skills they learned in the military to provide aid and support. In Haiti, they went into areas deemed too dangerous for other humanitarian aid workers. In 6 short years, Team Rubicon grew to over 30,000 veteran volunteers. They traveled the globe, including here in Traverse City, without pay, working to make the world a better place. They provide talent and leadership wherever disaster strikes, when government response and safety nets fail, and where nature makes its own rules. Several years ago, while I was still on active duty, I sponsored a golf tournament fundraiser for wounded troops. Sadly, our government doesn't provide for all the needs of our wounded. Families often require temporary housing, airplane tickets, and respite care. Resources must be found elsewhere. Unlike most generals, I don't golf. I could have gone so far. So I was a spectator. On the sidelines were 3 wounded Marines. They were not participating in the golf outing either. They were drinking sodas at a table, so I went over to talk to them. They told me that they didn't come from golfing backgrounds, and I thought very silently that they probably came from the same kind of blue-collar family as me. I offered to buy them a beer. One smiled and said, "We wouldn't want to get you in trouble, General. We aren't of legal age to drink." Think about that. All of them had several combat tours behind them, and all had been wounded, and all had made life or death decisions before they were old enough to buy a beer. We enrolled them in a local university. Several months later, one of the Marines returned to full duty and was redeployed into combat, and we arranged for him to continue his studies through distance learning. I also suggested to him that he keep in contact with me. By the way, a suggestion when a general tells a lance corporal doesn't work out that way. He mentioned difficulty in completing his calculus homework during an enemy attack on his position. He was off duty at the time, so I sent an email back and said, "Shouldn't you have been defending the base?" He answered immediately, "No, we have enough Marines to adequately defend the camp, and unless directed, the on-duty watch handles things. Besides," he added, "all the Marines want to fight, but nobody wants to help me with my calculus." Now, for those of you in the audience that have children, and for those of you that are listening to this talk streaming live to the various schools, just think about the concentration and the discipline required to do your calculus homework while under enemy fire. Tell that story to your kid the next time they say the schoolwork is too hard. So what does this generation need from us? Only opportunity and the recognition that they provide the solutions to our nation's needs for fresh leadership and ideas. In 2003, I led 5,000 Marines and sailors during the initial invasion of Iraq. My job was to ensure that the other Marines in theater had everything they needed to fight. The mission included running convoys through some very bad country from the Kuwait border to Baghdad. Each of these convoys required an officer to lead it, and I had a problem. I'd run out of officers. We decided to begin using senior enlisted to lead convoys as well. I walked into my operations center where some of my best enlisted troops worked, and I asked for a volunteer to take out the convoy in 2 days. Without hesitation, the first hand up was from a young female Navy corpsman. I looked at her and I said, "You've got it." There was quiet grumbling. The general had picked a sailor, not a Marine. Worse yet, a female. 2 days later, that same sailor took the convoy 200 miles into Iraq, completed her mission, and returned without incident. Several years later, I ran into her at a conference. She was now a Command Master Chief Petty Officer. That's as high as you can go as an enlisted sailor. She was the personal advisor to an admiral. She came up to me and she told me that that opportunity was the watershed moment and the defining event in her life. The confidence that experience gave her launched her career. She didn't lack the ability. She just needed a chance. Sometimes, though, opportunities have to be placed in escrow for the next generation. In 1995, I commanded 13 migrant camps of Cubans and Haitians at Guantanamo Bay during Operation Sea Signal. These migrants have been part of a general exodus that tried to make their way to Florida. Few migrants made it. Thousands died at sea to make it during the crossing attempt, and the remainder, about 50,000, were rescued by our U.S. Coast Guard and held at the Guantanamo Naval Base, some for up to 2 years. When Attorney General Janet Reno made the decision to admit all Cubans with clean records into the United States, my job changed dramatically. I told the Marines and soldiers who worked for me, "Make them want to be like us." We must have succeeded. Among the migrants was a 14-year-old named Armando Gonzalez. In his time in the camps, Armando learned English and the workings of American government. He watched the examples of Marines and soldiers only a few years older than himself. 7 years later, when we crossed into Iraq, Armando and 6 other bolseros, that's Spanish for rafters, that's what they called themselves, all 7 of them were members of my command as United States Marines. The last time I saw Armando was on the 13th of April, 2003. We were about 150 miles north of the Kuwait border in Iraq. The next day, he was dead. You always remember the first person you lose in combat. Armando left behind a wife who was 5 months pregnant, living in Miami. His daughter, Amanda, was born, never seeing the father, who risked everything to give her freedom and who died under the flag of this country. The following year, at our request, Governor Bush provided a full scholarship to any Florida university for Amanda, the daughter of a Cuban bolsero and a United States Marine. Armando got into a leaky boat as a young boy to search for a better life. He found it and then died for his adopted country in a lonely desert in Iraq. Sometimes opportunities must be delayed and passed down to the next generation. Not all stories are happy endings, but they all contain hope. This generation is special. Whether they come from poverty, from affluence, birthright, or naturalized citizens, they will provide the leadership we need for the future. When American veterans returned home after World War II, many went back to school under the GI Bill. The education those veterans received, coupled with their combat experiences, fueled the resurgence of America as a world power and the rise of the middle class. The original GI Bill provided the education for 14 Nobel Prize winners, 3 Supreme Court justices, 3 presidents, 12 senators, and 24 Pulitzer Prize winners. Historian Milton Greenberg, not Freeberg, by the way, Freeman, estimates that the GI Bill enriched the United States by producing 450,000 engineers, 240,000 accountants, 238,000 teachers, 91,000 scientists, 67,000 doctors, and 22,000 dentists. For some reason, he didn't mention lawyers. Those veterans became known as the greatest generation. Their work returned $7 to the American economy for every dollar invested in the GI Bill. Can you imagine any other government program with an equal return on investment? We have that same opportunity today. We've been at war now for 15 years. And sadly, I believe that we will be at war for that much longer. Perhaps one of the few positive outcomes of this war is the leaders it has created among the young people who volunteered to fight. Like steel, they've been tempered in the forge of adversity. They are committed, mission-focused, and ethical. So rather than rail against the pettiness and partisanship of our political process, take the long view. Look to our communities and the veterans they sent to war, that we sent to war, for solutions. The leadership of the future lives among us. They are in our schools. They are in our workplace. And they are working quietly and competently to create a better world. Look to this generation of remarkable Americans who will lead this nation and the world for the next 40 years. So what can you do about the future? When you meet a young veteran, don't just say thank you for your service, though that is appreciated, and it makes you feel good too. It isn't addressing the challenges facing our country. Find out what they are doing, what they are working on, and where their talents lie. And if you have the opportunity, give them a chance and a challenge, and they will amaze you. There is hope for this country, and it rests with the young veterans of this longest war in our nation's history. Thank you very much.